The Magnolia Media Podcast is brought to you by RHR Productions. Welcome back to the Magnolia Media Podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan M. Ruggiero, joined in studio today by Miss Courtney Brown. Miss Courtney, how goes it?
It goes very well, thank you.
Good. We'll get back to Miss Courtney in just a moment, but I had a little something prepared for today's show, and I thought we'd start with that. Today's show is going to go against a basic tenet of journalism. Today's episode is about a dream, my dream. As one long attempt to convince a very backward Tennessee that there are in fact enough of us to make Tennessee livable. As a person who is center-left, I have been an activist in this state for over 20 years. However, my mistakes have overshadowed my goals until now. I've reached a point in my life where I have options. I want to continue my education, but with ulterior motives. My move to improve my educational status stems from the need to sharpen my technological skills, meet talented young people, and meet folks who would make great interviewees for this podcast. Most recently, I've been considering downtown Pittsburgh as a potential place to live in the heart of a major city and attend a local university. I found the location, the school, and narrowed my search for places to live, but the feeling that it might not be a good fit keeps bugging me. I can't shake the feeling that I would be able to expand my talents, have more opportunities, and a better chance of finding a job in my new chosen profession if I can't make the Magnolia Media Podcast work or sell it to a larger company at some point. Well, all of those aforementioned opportunities really exist more in New York City. It's not that much more expensive, especially where and when I don't have to maintain a good car. In Pittsburgh, I would need a car. And I'd be paying about 80% of what I'd pay in New York City. In the end, I'd probably meet fewer people, as Pittsburgh has approximately half the population of Nashville, Tennessee. And it's a state that once voted for Donald Trump. I hate to hold that against them, but it is what it is. I do see Pittsburgh as a big blue eastern city. And it has the major sports teams, major industry, and enough young, smart people to help me build our show in a way I am simply unequipped to do. Leaving home is never easy. But Tennessee has changed for the worse in so many ways. As a liberal, common sense Democrat, I'm looked upon as some sort of a traitor, or as if I were the one who was politically illiterate. I can't help but shake my head at that assertion. Here in Tennessee, we have police that are untethered from reality due to their consumption of right-wing media. I am done watching incredibly gifted people like Democratic Senate candidate Gloria Johnson being ripped apart in local ads that misrepresent her and promote a woman who serves in the United States Senate, Marsha Blackburn, who hasn't done a single thing for Tennessee. The people of this once great state have taken the bait. They are now inclined to think that right to work laws are somehow good for them, when in fact they are a way of repressing the rights of hardworking Tennesseans. I wish so badly that the people of this state could understand the basics around America. For example, no one is taking your beloved guns. No one is going to shut down your church, although they probably should if that church is nothing more than a non-taxable propaganda wing of the Republican Party, if they can even call themselves Republicans anymore. I can't take the madness that is the lack of good jobs. My business partner, Miss Courtney, who happens to be in studio today, has 8 years of executive experience, a BA, and is attending a prestigious school of business. But in a recent job hunt, the salaries were so low that she instead chose a nonprofit. In the end, she'll take home about the same amount of money and be able to sleep a little easier at night. For the life of me, I can't think of a reason to stay in Tennessee. Our only city worth the cost is Nashville, and it's often a target of the alt-right groups that want to intimidate the good people of the city. It's truly a wonderful city, but I'm done living in a place where I'd be paying New York prices only to be deprived of all New York has to offer. And the idea of living in another blue city in a deep red state makes me physically ill. I want to excel at what I do. I've always been a comfortable public speaker and a semi-competent writer, but as my life just hung in limbo for the better part of 15 years, that time has come and gone. And while I'm not a rich man, I do have options. I also do not believe a degree does anything to help build the talent necessary to be a radio, podcast, or TV news host. God knows I have a face for radio. But I realize the connections and possible internships are well worth pursuing a degree. Just getting my 40-year-old foot in the door is my goal. I feel once there, I'd be able to stand with the best of them. I want to be a consummate New Yorker. I knew it from the time I stepped out of the cab on the corner of Broadway and 54th. I took a breath of that cosmopolitan air, and I just knew I had a feeling that I've never had anywhere else I've ever traveled. It took me back to age 11 or 12 when I last visited the city alongside my father. New York at the time, the mid-90s, was a bit different. It was more affordable, but one was much more likely to be, mugged. When I graduated high school, I applied to and was accepted to a couple of universities in the New York area, but was denied permission by my father, who sabotaged my early college career anyway. The worst advice I've ever gotten was from my father. Every time he offered his unsolicited advice, it was as if he had a second chance at life by living vicariously through me. Today I suffer from a knee, back, and shoulder pain brought on by football. The worst part is I didn't want to play football. I wanted to play on the golf team and be a participant in drama. But those things were all but vetoed by the same man. And my lack of courage to stand up and say no, I don't make a habit out of blaming anyone else for the things that didn't go my way or the way I would have liked, except when it's actually their fault. Frankly, that's very rare. But it does happen. On occasion, I chose competitive weightlifting, and I'm sure that exacerbated those injuries to my shoulders, knee, and back. Enough about all of that. Let's move on, shall we? As I wrestle with a decision on whether to move and where to live, I am keenly aware that getting to live in New York City is a toss-up if I don't do it now. If I wait, I'll be spending precious time and money I foresee causing problems on down the road. Like, what if I made the move to Pittsburgh or Philly, but didn't have the savings to live in New York a few years down the road? Without living there, it'll be a lot harder to acquire employment in the city. It would be much more difficult to make it in my chosen career field in a city with one major news outlet and no podcast of which to speak. Meanwhile, the Big Apple, I know, I dusted that relic off of a nickname, offers so many opportunities. Just a chance, that's all I'm seeking. As I weigh what to do, I can't help but feel I've had a harder time adjusting to New York City, but Pittsburgh wouldn't be all that easy either. The simple fact, as tiring as it can be, is I truly love bringing you folks an aggregate of the daily news in our little podcast. We certainly do a better job, but then again, who couldn't? And that's my little summary. And my own personal, I guess, torment, my own personal turmoil, as I have to make a decision in the next couple of months that will frankly shape the rest of my life. And now that I've sort of shot through that, Miss Courtney, what do you think? Do you have an opinion on the topic at all?
I mean, it's really where you want to settle down. You're so adamant about New York. I don't think you're going to be happy unless you go to New York. Because I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but you've got New York stuck in your mind, and that's where you want to go. I think you like Pittsburgh a lot, but I think you're going to like New York better.
Yeah, and what I've discovered was looking at pricing, and of course New York is infamous for being expensive, is that Pittsburgh has a total population of, let's give them high-end, 350,000 people. New York has a population of 9 million. The greater New York area is about 27 million people. So the opportunities are plentiful there, even for someone of my age returning to school, again, to advance my technological ability, my ability to meet young people, younger people, even like yourself, who've been able to help me immensely with the podcast. And of course, you're more than just help. You're one of the founding members. But yes, I have to admit that when I visited New York early this summer, or in the middle of the summer, there was a sense of, I found my place. From the moment I arrived at the corner of Broadway and 54th, it was a special feeling. And it's the first time I felt that way in a long time. And it's maybe the only time I've ever felt that way about any place. So as great as downtown Pittsburgh is, I don't see a plethora of opportunity after a couple of years of brushing up on some of these skills that we talked about a little earlier, or that I talked about in the copy that I just went through a few moments ago. You kind of get what I mean?
Yeah. And yeah, I think you're right that that you have the more opportunities in New York, and that already being a resident of New York, I think, will help with your job hunt.
Yeah, being a student there, and a lot of being a student there is just about being able to be a legal intern.
Yeah.
They can't hire you as an intern if you're not a student. That's called slavery. And that's been banned for quite some time, unless you ask the wannabe Republican governor of North Carolina, who believes we should bring slavery back despite being a black man. But we'll save that for a little later on in the show. So again, we're breaking a basic tenet of journalism here. And we're making the story about us. And that story is how to either grow the Magnolia Media podcast, which we'd probably rename and rebrand in a place like New York, how to grasp the largest, number of opportunities. Obviously, New York is full of legacy media, legacy podcasts, non-legacy podcasts. It's full of music and art. Of course, there's Central Park. There's Washington Square Park. There's Union Square Park. There are so many green spaces within that major metropolis to go and walk the dog or just get a breath of fresh air. And it's, best I can tell, a healthier lifestyle as well. While Pittsburgh, again, offers that inner city vibe, it's really just a vibe. There's not a whole lot to the city as far as opportunities. Again, they have their own CBSN network. That's, of course, a bit different. I'm not interested in being a local television news host. That's certainly not what I'm going back to school to study. It's for something more along these lines. So, it's something perhaps our viewers can weigh in. Leave us comments. We always try to check those comments. Send emails to
magnoliamedia2024@gmail.com.
At Gmail, right? Magnolia Media 2024. That's where we go to check to see what's been sent to us, and of course you can always comment on my Instagram or Threads account at Magnolia John 2024. And I take those things to heart, especially when they come from people who have been supporters of the podcast, for quite some time, or supporters of mine when I go live on Instagram. But I think that that's a discussion for us to have personally, because there's, as much deliberation and consternation as there is around this decision. And again, the opportunity may not be there 2 or 3 or 4 years down the line once I've exhausted everything Pittsburgh has to offer. Again, because it's just so expensive. I mean, a move to New York has to sort of be a deliberate thing. So anyway, back to today's topic. Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. Back to talking about the 2024 election, which is upon us. Let's forget about November 5th. November 5th is when we begin to see final numbers. It's really an election month or a 6-week period. They've already started mailing ballots in some parts of the country. By the beginning of next week, the election will be upon us. And the pool of possible voters out there it's shrinking. And I don't think there's a serious threat to mail-in voting, because now Republican leaders are trying to get Republican voters on board to vote by mail.
I'm sure they'll still turn around when Kamala wins and say it was a mail-in ballot issue.
What worries me is when Kamala wins, the things they already have in place in states like Georgia in particular, which, by the way, Georgia, we made Georgia a swing state. Georgia wasn't a swing state. Nobody in 2016 or 17 was talking about Georgia being the next blue state. It worked out that way. No one was talking about Arizona being the next blue state. It worked out that way. Arizona's a blue state. And Donald Trump versus Kamala Harris in Arizona, with Ruben Gallego being the Senate candidate there and being up anywhere from 6 to 13 points. The polls are so wide. I think that we do have to look at the reverse coattail effect that might be taking place. Again, same thing with Jackie Rosen. People say, well, in a state like Nevada, which deals with a lot of immigration, as does Arizona, they might not want to vote for a woman. Well, the female candidate for the United States Senate in Arizona is Carrie Lake. Crazy Carrie. Remember her? My goodness gracious. Carrie Lake is, I think she even frightens Trump. And then in Nevada, Jackie Rosen is a woman, and she's got a double-digit lead and has this entire election cycle, even when Joe Biden was losing the state by double digits to Trump early in the summer and in the late spring. Then as we move on up the election map, we look at Wisconsin. They say it's 2 points. They also said that, again, Judge Janet Protasewicz was losing the Chief Justice Supreme Court race by 2 points. And she won by 11. So that's a 13, 14, 15-point swing from exit polls. Exit polls. So that's polling people as they come out of the polling location. That's how far off these polls can be at times. Michigan is a completely blue state with an extremely popular female governor, Gretchen Whitmer. They have a Democratic House, a Democratic Senate, 2 Democratic senators, a Democratic Attorney General, Democratic Lieutenant Governor, and Democratic Governor. And you mean to tell me that's a 2-point state or a 3-point state? Come on. That's not going to be decided by 150,000 votes. It's just not. And that special on MSNBC about Saginaw County last night on, I think, Alex Wagner's show, give me an effing break. That's ridiculous. Then we have Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is truly a difficult state because you have so many backward red counties in the heart of the state. However, she has basically been camped out in the state of Pennsylvania for a significant amount of time now. I mean, she's been there since pre-debate, and I think she's been outside the state, obviously, but she seems to have sort of moved her campaign headquarters into Pittsburgh, speaking of Pittsburgh, which is exciting because when she goes out for a coffee, for example, people get to see her. They're not seeing Donald Trump except when he's giving speeches at an economic forum and drooling on himself. And instead of he's drooling on himself on stage, he can't get words out without spitting everywhere and his mouth hanging open, CNN runs with the headline, Donald Trump gives speech at economic forum. If Joe Biden had gotten up on stage and drooled on himself while trying to get a sentence out, I mean, it'd be breaking news every hour on the hour on CNN, wouldn't it?
Oh yeah, it'd be everywhere. Just look at how old he is now. Like, there would be no rest.
And then in Ohio, the Ohio candidate running against Sherrod Brown said he doesn't understand why women over 50 even care about the abortion issue. As a woman, do you have a response to that?
People need to get it through their head. It's not an issue about abortion. That's not what it is. It's just what everyone's latching onto. It's about women's rights and women's health. And, I mean, over 50, you still have reproductive, things you have to take care of.
You might also have daughters.
Oh, exactly. That was my next point. You have the future generation that you don't want to be like that.
I think it's grown into a bigger issue than that. I think one of the reasons you have such broad support, including from men, on the issue is because it's an issue of freedom. And that's one less freedom Americans enjoy in 20 some odd states. In fact, now we've got a couple of cases coming out of Georgia where women have bled to death or died of sepsis waiting to be sick enough for the doctors to feel that they won't be sent to prison for life for helping remove a dead fetus? If all this is about the preservation of life, why can't an unviable fetus be removed at any point in time? That makes no sense at all. So, as you've got these people that don't touch our guns, it's our freedom this, freedom that. Well, now they've attacked a freedom directly and said, no, you can't have it anymore. You're not worthy of it for whatever reason. And the apparatus that is the disgusting Republican Party, that'll have to be burned down and rebuilt in some other image post-Trump anyway, is sort of latching on to this idea of reduced freedoms.
The double standard and hypocrisy among people is just appalling.
Yeah, I agree with you. But don't you think it's sort of catching on as a bigger issue?
I think it is. I think it's doing the same thing that gay rights did. It's becoming more than just gay marriage. Like, You're right. It's becoming like a huge thing to everybody. Because if they start taking, women's rights away,
it's
next?
a slippery slope. And authoritarian governments, the first thing they go after are guns. They do not want a well-armed population as they try to enforce martial law.
And you got to start small. You don't everything in everybody's face right at once. You start little. You start taking off 1-2 things here on the fringe, kind of desensitize people to it, and then you start taking away the bigger issues.
You've got a good point there. You've got a good point. And I'm not sure. We just saw Mark Cuban endorse Kamala Harris because, well, frankly, her economic plan won't send America into a recession, as Donald Trump has guaranteed a 10% tariff on every item that comes into the United States, but a 60 to 100% tariff on everything that comes in from China.
It's really funny how everyone wants to embrace his economic plan, quotation marks, but he has no economic experience. Like that's what always confused me. Like he doesn't understand how the basic economy works. Like how can he have a plan?
Right. Just bankruptcy, Chapter 11 restructuring, or bankruptcy to create a tax shelter for its failing businesses. Another little piece of news that came across the radar is that the gap between, well, first of all, Kamala Harris has fallen into the positive category when it comes to likability. She's made up 20 points since becoming the Democratic nominee in the likability category. Donald Trump's still underwater by 12 points. So he is strongly disliked. She is liked. However, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, and hopefully future Vice President of the United States, has a 12-point approval rating. 12-point in the black, plus 12 approval rating, I should say. So people like the hell out of Tim
You
Walz.
can't not love him.
I mean,
he just comes across as that like sweet, dad that everybody wants.
And he has so much more experience debating than does J.D. Vance because of his time in the House, because of his time running for governor of Minnesota. That's going to be one to watch.
I was about to ask. I don't remember. What was the date for that? Have they set one?
I'm not sure. It'd be an easy thing to look, though. Let's look on one of our many devices here in the office and see when the vice presidential debate
I think happens. It will be a wonderful debate to watch. I almost want to see that more than I do the Trump-Harris debate, because we all knew she was going to wipe the floor with him. Like that wasn't up for debate. And I mean, we know Tim Walz is going to do pretty good too, but I can't wait to see it because he's so used to dealing with high schoolers that's what he's going to treat J.D. Vance as one of his high schoolers.
As
like
a child with eye makeup.
Right. Like I'm really interested to see how he handles J.D. Vance.
October 1st, by the way.
Coming up right around the corner. Yeah. That would be
9 p.m.
Tuesday.
to 10:30.
Tuesday. Now we know what we need to do Tuesday.
All the important things happen on Tuesdays. The election happens on a Tuesday.
I never realized that until you just said
Yeah,
that.
they all happen on Tuesdays. It's always a Tuesday. That's why for a long time Election Day was on November 3rd. Then it jumped to the 7th, and now it's back to the 5th. But Election Day matters less and less and less because by Election Day, most people have either voted early, dropped their ballot off at a drop box, or have mailed their ballots in. And of course, the court battles will rage on as those ballots, begin to pile in. But I don't think that we're going to have very many states, maybe North Carolina, maybe Georgia, where it's going to be that close. Again, Florida, especially if Kamala Harris is able to break through in Florida, or if Colin Allred wins the Senate seat in Texas. Those will be obviously litigated right up until the day, Senator Allred takes Ted Cruz's seat.
Honestly, I wouldn't trust the election results and literally until the day Kamala Harris is inaugurated, because it's just going to be fight after fight after fight.
Chris LaCivita, the architect of the John Kerry Swift boat, which you're too young to remember, but John Kerry, the senator from Massachusetts, was running in 2004 against George W. Bush, and they sabotaged his war record, 2 Purple Hearts, calling it stolen valor, because Chris LaCivita came up with this plan to denigrate his service during Vietnam, which was disgusting and repulsive. But again, this was when Bush was kind of at the height of his the only time he was popular, before the Iraq War had drug on for years, before Afghanistan had drug on for years, before those body bags began to return home, and before people really started questioning where exactly are these weapons of mass destruction that we were told were being hidden in Iraq, especially once we had complete control of the country. So Chris LaCivita says, now that he's Trump's campaign manager or strategist or whatever, that the election isn't over until January 20th, which of course is Inauguration Day.
I'm always really torn between, since Republicans like to play so dirty, I'm always torn between rooting for the Democrats to keep the upper hand and be the bigger person and, actually be what we stand for, and to play just as dirty.
Well, they've had to. They've had to. And part of that has been so many Trump Republicans have joined Democrats. And I'm speaking primarily of the Lincoln Project. Those guys over at the Lincoln Project, George Conway, and others who have, frankly, Steve Schmidt, have just come out swinging. And now we have Republicans who are used to rolling around in the mud, making ads for Democratic candidates and against Republicans. And they are nasty. I mean, they go after the jugular with every one of them. And, there are people when you snap back for a second into reality, Michael Cohen, who was the key witness in the hush money case that got Trump convicted of 34 criminal counts in New York State, and is obviously a target of so much hate from Trump's backward, moronic supporters who believe in the border crisis. My goodness gracious, a border crisis.
The people on the border
nuts.
don't even believe in a border crisis.
Also, Trump is now officially being sued by a pro-Haitian migrant group in Springfield, Ohio. The papers were filed yesterday in Clark County, Ohio, to start the process of going after Donald Trump for violating and causing terroristic threats in that community by saying the things that he had to say about Haitian migrants eating pets. And now, people are having to shelter in place people who come from Haiti, the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, a country torn apart by drugs and gang violence,
and weather.
and yes, and I was getting to that by weather and earthquakes. I mean, a gang literally drove up and shot the president, Jovenel Moise. What was it, a year ago now? I mean, this is the most unstable place in our part of the world, and these 10 to 15,000 people got an opportunity to come to a dying town, and take jobs that no one else will take. But in an MSNBC town hall last night, you had two younger union members, two men who work in unions, saying that they were going to vote for Donald Trump no matter what because of the migrant crisis, and they live in fucking Michigan. What are you talking about? Are the Canadians coming down? I mean, first of all, they would consider too many Americans trying to make their way into Canada an immigration problem, and then, the right-wing populists wouldn't want us in Canada. There were some older union members there, men, who were enraged by this, that these young men had taken the poison. Again, starting with podcasters like Joe Rogan, who at first seem harmless because they have consequential people like Neil deGrasse Tyson or a famous actor or comedian on his show, but then Charlie Kirk will show up, or this Jordan Peterson fellow who used to be a target for Christopher Hitchens when Hitchens was alive. He was made into a very small man when he had to share a stage with Christopher Hitchens. YouTube it. It's totally worth a watch. Just, if nothing else, to watch Jordan Peterson be taken apart by Christopher Hitchens, who was intellectually his superior in every way. So it was just astounding that these young men were unaware that the CHIPS Act, the Infrastructure Act, were the two things that gave them the jobs that they had. The financial security they had came from the Biden-Harris administration. And they are still hung up on something that has no effect on them whatsoever because they live in Michigan. And Springfield, Ohio, again, has a dying town in the center of the Rust Belt, gets an influx of young migrants who are hungry to work, hungry for places to live. All of a sudden you have construction popping up everywhere for people to live. New construction, that equals jobs for everybody. Trained carpenters, people who do mud work, who lay concrete. Then, of course, you have them working on the kill floor of a meatpacking plant. I have had the misfortune of walking onto the kill floor at a meatpacking plant, and that's something that will haunt you like a beheading video. The way we produce meat in this country has to change in general, but in the interim, that is a terribly difficult job. But Haitians, living through what they've lived through, are more than happy to do it. So you have a community that was thriving until Donald Trump decides he's going to stick his filthy fingers into the pie and stir up a hornet's nest. Then J.D. Vance is going to do the same thing. So both of them are, going to be hopefully held liable for it. This is, of course, all dependent upon keeping this crazy person out of the White House. And I think we're starting to see clear signs that is the likely outcome. As Pennsylvania looks like it's opening up, Michigan and Wisconsin were never states I believe Donald Trump was going to win again. And Nebraska deciding that they are not going to roll Omaha into the rest of the state. It will still be its own electoral vote in and of itself. That's enough to win the election. That's the election, folks. Now, control of the Senate rests on winning Ohio and picking up one other seat if, in fact, John Tester loses in Montana. Tester has been sort of a proven warrior in that state, but I think he's finally sort of run out of gas because of the pervasiveness of Donald Trump on a state that is full of alt-right white supremacy militia groups. It's, Montana has really become a hotbed for this domestic terrorism. I don't know how much you've read or heard about this, but Montana is going to be a difficult win for Democrats. However, unfortunately, North Carolina doesn't have a Senate seat, up for grabs this time around. But again, Florida and Texas do, and we're within striking distance of both. What would be? I think Colin Allred's a better candidate, but we're closer in the presidential race in Florida. So it's a bit of a conundrum. I think, first of all, Democrats need to start spending money in Florida now because they basically stopped funding races in Florida. And they need to pour resources in to Colin Allred, who's running against Ted Cruz, who gets all of his money from one or two sources.
And, I mean, it's been pretty clear that they've got the money for it. I mean, they've raised huge amounts of money. I think it's going to be hard to decide until it gets here whether or not it's going to be Texas or Florida. I think we're going to win at least one of them. Maybe we could even squeak out both of them.
Well, I think that's tough, although I've heard historians talk about, the trajectory of those two states getting ever closer, that this could turn into a wipeout. And I know in some ways mainstream media, legacy news, they're doing us a favor by rigging polls to show a close race when we all can look at 538 and see the polls that we don't see on CNN or the goddamn New York Times, which Siena College's polling methodology is just, they're bending over backward to make this look like a close race. When Harris wins Michigan by 6 and Wisconsin by 5 and Pennsylvania by 4 and, then goes on to win Nevada by, 2 or 3 points, it's not going to be a big win because we only win one county, Clark, in the entire state of Nevada. But, of course, that's Las Vegas. That's where everybody lives.
Hey, a win's a win.
Right. And Maricopa County is half or more of the state of Arizona. And so you need to win one county in Arizona, and you need to win it by a pretty fair margin. And it looks like she's poised to do that as well. Then you've got Georgia and North Carolina. She's ahead in North Carolina, supposedly behind in Georgia. And remember, Georgia came down to 11,780 votes. And why is that so easy to remember? Because Mango Mussolini called and tried to find 11,780 votes, leaning on Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, who is still in charge of elections in the state of Georgia. And he held up. He held up under the incredible pressure being put on him by, Mr. and Mrs. Magnolia and, Donald Trump himself, who, of course, he recorded that phone call and is the basis of the RICO case against Donald Trump in Georgia. All of these things, the Chutkan case in D.C., which was for the coup attempt on January 6th, the new filing entered by Jack Smith was accepted by the court. Then, of course, the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals in Georgia and Atlanta, they're hearing arguments on whether or not to bring back the stolen documents case that was dismissed by Judge Cannon on the most ridiculous premise anyone has ever heard. And her premise was that because special counsels weren't Senate confirmed, they lack the authority to pursue criminal charges against anyone. Now think of all the people who've been put in jail by special counsels. All of those people would be subject to immediate removal, wouldn't they?
You would think so, but I feel like if there's a special counsel needed for your trial, that you probably shouldn't be let out of jail.
No, obviously special counsels are legal and constitutional. You
Wait.
can have a special counsel. You can have a special prosecutor. She was bending over backward to
she
do a
was
favor for
reaching
Trump.
for anything she
She's
could find
been
for Trump.
reversed by the 11th Circuit like 38 times already. Actually, I think it was officially twice. They're also trying to pursue a second, another judge. They want to make sure that this goes to Miami, to a courthouse that can actually handle a case like this and get it out of Port Arthur, Florida. I lived in that part of Florida every summer from age 2 until 12 or 13. And I've never heard of Port Arthur, Florida before.
No, and I lived in Florida too for 15 years.
I lived on the East Coast between, Melbourne, Cocoa, all that area. We traveled up and down the coast from Miami, Vero Beach, all that. I have never heard of this dump called Port Arthur, where she is the senior most judge and she's like 44 years old. So there's no one there to help her. You move this on to a more experienced judge who has experience with SIPA cases, Classified Information Protection Act. So, someone who actually has the security clearance to see the documents in question, the ones that aren't missing, which there are a frightening number of those documents missing, including plans to attack Iran, which have had to be scrapped. And of course, the U.S. military's had to scramble to fix those things. But you got a guy who's promising to have Hillary Clinton executed and Joe Biden executed and Michael Cohen executed. The federal government has actually set up a special passport with a new name. Michael Cohen talked again last night on MSNBC on the 11th hour with Stephanie Ruhle about what happens to him if Trump's elected. He loses his family. Michael Cohen has to flee the country using a passport with a different name on it. Has to flee the country and probably never come back, because he's obviously target number one for assassination by a man who would be untethered to reality and the law because of the Supreme Court, this corrupt Supreme Court's ruling. Obviously, the Supreme Court has a vested interest in keeping Kamala Harris and a Democratic Congress and Senate out of control, because the moment we have Joe Manchin out of the Senate, which he's retiring, Kyrsten Sinema, she's done, Ruben Gallegos replacing her as the Democrat from Arizona. As soon as we have a Democratic majority in both chambers and a Democratic president, there will be no more 9-member Supreme Court. And I know that Alito and Thomas will retire along with Sotomayor to try and stave all that off. I don't think it'll matter. Their seats will be replaced, and then it needs to be expanded out to at least 15 seats. There is no constitutional number. Everything else would require a constitutional amendment. Any other change to the court, like 18-year terms, so that every president would get to appoint a new Supreme Court judge every 2 years. But that all requires, 75% of the states, requires 2/3 majority in the House and the Senate. Those all seem so far-fetched that the easiest way to do it is to kill the filibuster. And by the way, Joe Manchin, the lowly piece of shit Joe Manchin, says he will not be voting for Kamala Harris, a Democrat from West Virginia, the least important state in America. Yes, it makes more sense to have North and South Dakota than it does to have a West Virginia. Anyway.
Oh, that's the state we could absorb back into Virginia and make D.C. a state.
There we go.
We could keep the Dakotas. They're big enough.
Yeah, they're big. I mean, it's just there's no one there. But these states are, with the exception of a state like Virginia, which probably pays more into the government than it takes out. as far as federal funding is concerned. California pays way more into the federal government than it receives. Washington State, New York State, Massachusetts. By the way, Massachusetts is number one in quality of life and number one in government engagement among its citizens in the states. So there's a correlation there that people in these populist right-wing states like, unfortunately, Tennessee can't seem to put their finger on. That there's a correlation between being involved with the federal government, playing nice, in other words, and being happy, and having access to things like Medicaid expansion, which we still don't have in Tennessee. And it's been told to me by Republican leaders in this state that it won't happen because a, quote, black man passed a law. It's named after him, or the nickname is, of course, the Obamacare. The Affordable Care Act made Medicaid expansion possible, and the federal government pays for 90% of it. But, of course, they didn't use the term black man.
One thing that made me giggle earlier, so I had to take my brother to the doctor, and on all the TVs, they're always pushing for older people to get the RSV vaccine. Mm-hmm. And there was a little sticky sign on the door that said, Medicare does not cover the RSV vaccine. I thought that was the kind of weirdest thing if you're going to push so hard for older people to get it.
Well, in order to have a truly improved medical system, healthcare system in America, that would be a Medicare for all system. We would be, as far as pharmaceuticals are concerned, we would have to remove 70% of the cost by simply getting rid of the middlemen. The middlemen take 70% of the cost in the form of salaries, basically. They're just office costs. So that's why, for example, these GLP-1 drugs that are helping people reverse type 2 diabetes, lose weight, cost $250 in the UK, but $953 Ozempic in the United States. That $700 is going to, well, frankly, some asshole. It's going to some middleman group, some organization that is preying on sick people. Same thing for other drugs that are under patent. So it's a lot to absorb. It's a lot to think about. I think improving the Affordable Care Act and holding these awful companies responsible, getting venture capital out of primary care would be huge.
Yeah, that would be a good first step.
I mean, that would be huge because right now doctors have a 7-minute limit to see patients. First of all, that in and of itself, there needs to be a federal law protecting doctors to say it doesn't matter who puts money into your practice or who owns the practice for which you work. They cannot tell you how long you can spend with a patient. If you need to spend 20 hours with a patient, spend the 20 hours. 7 minutes? I mean, this is why people get so frustrated with doctor's visits. Well, it's not completely the doctor's fault. They're sort of being blackmailed into it, for lack of a better term, as they, again, are sort of pushed up against the wall. So it's difficult, and it's a lot to think about. But again, the good news is Harris appears to have a clear lead in North Carolina, a clear lead in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. It's going to be a close race in Arizona, Nevada, whatever. It's going to be a 2 or 3 point win in Nevada, maybe more because Jackie Rosen again has a double-digit lead. So does Ruben Gallego in Arizona, which I think will have reverse coattails. Same thing with the governor's race in North Carolina. That's opening up to a 15-point lead for Josh Stein. So with Mark Robinson's continued fallout, only 3 staffers remain since CNN unearthed the comments that he was, quote, a black Nazi, a supporter of slavery, quote, some people deserve to be slaves, and others that are just too filthy to even mention here. And these were found on, I guess, a black porn site, or a porn site featuring black women, where he enjoyed himself some transgender pornography while then going out and using the LGBTQ community as a punching bag, a verbal punching bag. So Mark Robinson's political career is coming to an end before our eyes. And I think that only helps Kamala Harris. Obviously, it helps North Carolina, because North Carolina is 1 seat away in the House and 1 seat away in the Senate from having Democratic control of government, which is huge considering where they were back when Roy Cooper was initially elected in 2016. And they had such a majority that Cooper could get almost nothing done through his first 2 years in office. So let's hope for the best. Continue telling your friends. If you can't, send this podcast to someone that you know, someone who doesn't listen to this podcast. Help us keep our numbers high, that we can keep the Magnolia Media Podcast and the Magnolia Media Network going for you as long as possible. Again, you can also give if you want to directly through patreon.com/the Magnolia Media Network. You can follow me on Instagram and Threads at MagnoliaJohn2024, and Miss Courtney is
Magnolia Courtney 2024.
Okay, and that's on Instagram and Threads as well. We appreciate feedback. Of course, we read the reviews. You can hit us at our Gmail address, magnoliamedia2024@gmail.com. And if there's nothing, is there anything else from you, Miss Courtney?
No, you pretty much covered it.
Yeah, okay. Well, thanks for bearing with me through that early copy that I decided to go through. I appreciate you guys so much. And for those of you who are listening who were on the live last night or yesterday afternoon, that was a really good one. I had a great time chatting with you guys. So until next time, I'm your host, Jonathan M. Ruggiero.
And I'm your co-host, Courtney Brown.
And until next time, from all of us here at the Magnolia Media Podcast, be well, won't you?